I know is that first, you've got to get mad. You've got to say, I'm a human being. God damn it. My life has value.
Courage. Ralphie Parker had it. But before he unleashed it in 1983's A Christmas Story, first he had to have had enough. This scene, from that movie we all love, says a lot about courage, what it means, and under what conditions it tends to emerge from the most seemingly harmless sources, in film and in real life. Because we're all Ralphie, or can be Ralphie when pushed to the limit. And when bullies or the powers that be overplay their hand, something happens in the hearts of those of us who have suffered fools too much for too long. While the definition of courage is straightforward enough, its etymology is far more interesting and informative. Etymology, or the study of words and its basic components, unlocks a lot of secrets about the world we live in. This is the reason why members of the moneyed ruling class take a keen interest in Latin, while many of our neighbors struggle to express their thoughts without the aid of poop emojis. The first half of the word courage comes from the Latin word cor, C-O-R, which means heart.
Oh man, I'm sorry. I swear I was at the nurse because I had to sign up for this. En français.
In French, the heart is called le cœur, which, for non-coincidental reason, kind of sounds like care, but is even more precisely considered by its English counterpart, core, with an E. But core of what? Well, the core of you and I, or the center of our spiritual essence, which is our heart, and could be better understood as the intersection of our feeling and our knowing. Let's get Eastern with this to unlock more. It will point back quite nicely to our beloved Ralphie, the hero of this scene in A Christmas Story. For those who may be unfamiliar, these are chakras, or the 7 nodes or wheels of frequency that run along our spinal cord from our head to our tailbone. By the way, Christianity, which is far richer than it lets on, has its own version of these, described somewhat cryptically in the Bible as the 7 seals, but you won't learn that in church, and they can't be understood by conventional biblical interpretation. As the core, the heart chakra lives where you might expect it to, in the center. Given that chakras are arranged from high to low based on their vibrational speed, the heart chakra is the central node in terms of its frequency, vibrating or resonating, respectively, at a medium pace. No Adam Sandler jokes, please. The lower chakras correspond to the lower emotional states, lust and rage, for example, as the higher chakras correspond to the higher realms of thought and intuition.
Karate here. Karate here. Karate never here. You understand?
I think so.
There are no good or bad chakras, just as there are no inherently good or bad emotional states. But the heart chakra occupies a unique role as the vibrational center between the lower emotional frequencies and the higher sensorial ones. It's a hybrid of sorts. If it was a car, it would be a Toyota Prius, part combustion engine and part electrical functioning, if that helps. This system explains Ralphie, you, I, and everyone will ever know. Having accounted for the first half of the word courage as heart, we move on to the second part or syllable of the word, which is rage. While it's reasonable to protest that there's only one letter R in courage, so it should be spelled with 2 R's in order for this to make sense, the response to that is that, as words are constructed from different languages and across different ages, certain shortcuts, conventions, and abbreviations are made when crafting and combining new terms from their constituent parts. And this just happens to be one of many examples of that. The second R was simply omitted, probably because it was redundant. While rage is a pretty powerful term and carries with it a lot of potentially negative implications, it has everything to do with bravery in action, particularly among those who are measured and slow to anger. Kind of like Ralphie, or any reasonable person who might set aside their Bruce Banner under certain conditions when sufficiently prodded. So, the dictionary definition of courage is the quality of mind or spirit that enables a person to face difficulty, danger, pain, etc. without fear. In another word, bravery. But the etymological meaning of courage is core anger, or more precisely, heart rage. This is what courage actually means on the most basic primal level. When our heart has endured too much unfairness and cruelty, out of its love of all things good, it births an intense anger that finally fuels action. The heart or core births rage. Again, courage or core rage is heart rage. This is a kind of anger, unrestrained in its moment by concerns for personal safety, because the gravity of circumstance has necessitated a singular focus toward neutralizing its transgressor. This is when things get dangerous for bullies of all stripes. When rage is righteous, its volume corresponds proportionately to the quality and quantity of the transgression that birthed it. Mess around a bit, find out a bit. But f*** around and really find out. Paradoxes, when fully understood, are logical. In the case of courage, it's paradoxical that the heart, typically associated with love and kindness, can also be the source of intense anger and potentially dangerous force. But it does make sense. There are bad things in the world that simply refuse to leave good things alone until they encounter a response. When this becomes crystal clear, the time for restraint has passed, and the heart, as the intersection of emotion and higher reasoning, harnesses all available will toward making things right. This should never, ever be confused with senseless, silly violence from misguided souls who lash out as they mistake personal grievances and failures for injustice. That's another thing altogether.
Listen, jerk. When I tell you to come, you better come. Come on, cry, baby, cry for me. Come on, cry.
Deep in the recesses of my brain, a tiny red-hot little flame began to grow. Something had happened. A fuse blew, and I had gone out of my skull.
This portion is worth reviewing. The adult voice of Ralphie, our narrator, says, "Deep in the recesses of my brain, a tiny red-hot little flame began to grow." This points us back again to chakras. The red-hot flame corresponds to the root chakra, which governs anger or violent impulse. Again, this is not a bad chakra. Fire isn't bad, but it can be. The only exception I might take with this line, from an accuracy standpoint, not a major dialogue criticism, is that the red-hot flame wouldn't be burning in Ralphie's brain as much as his gut. The brain would be more measured and logical. Think Captain Spock as opposed to Captain Kirk. By the way, this is also where the expression of having guts as a shorthand code for having courage comes from. The red, root chakra happens to be located there, near the lower midsection of our intestinal tract. You may have also heard of intestinal fortitude. While these expressions and verbal peculiarities are not hard laboratory proof of what they point to, they are sufficient evidence of an ancient awareness of the location of these emotional centers within the human body. It's unreasonable and unintelligent to dismiss these mystical and linguistical oddities as mere coincidence. They're simply too numerous to discount. There is such a thing as objective good in the world, which, despite dishonest postmodern notions and the misapplication of relativity from the realm of physics toward the moral sphere, goodness and truth are entities that can be known. It's up to us as human beings to discover what is right and what is true.
Hammer time!
Anger is justified from those sitting in righteousness, and while there will always be debates on subjectivity and when it's proper to return force, the debate doesn't negate the necessity of the justified application of force, nor does it justify the improper application of it. But those who possess sufficient genuine care will tend to take the proper measured response through their righteous indignation, provided they remain righteous. Show me someone incapable of anger, and I'll show you someone incapable of love. Ralphie, pushed to the limit in this scene, becomes the embodiment of situational courage as he finally unloads on Scut Farkus, the neighborhood bully. It's important to note the confluence of events that precedes the beatdown. Ralphie, disappointed and distraught by the possibility of not getting the one thing he really wants for Christmas, is already in a sad, vulnerable state.
I want an official Red Ryder Carbine Action 200 shell range ball air rifle.
No. Shoot your eye out.
You'll shoot your eye out?
You'll shoot your eye out! You'll shoot your eye out!
You'll shoot your eye out, kid. Merry Christmas. Ho, ho, ho.
That, coupled with an incoming fast snowball to the face, and the cruel follow-up taunts from Farkus, was sufficient to break the camel's back of Ralphie's restraint. It's worth appreciating how A Christmas Story manages to humorously and quite accurately show through Ralphie how a child's imagination skews reality in ways that intensify their emotional experiences. Before his fight with Farkus, Ralphie had already taken a few too many laps on the emotional roller coaster of his mind. Although the daydream or daymare scene in the classroom is funny for the audience, it's not just a joke. This is how this kind of moment might feel to a kid. It's quite astute. Miss Shields, Ralphie's teacher, is hardly a witch for warning him that a BB gun isn't the safest of toys. She's being responsible. But kids, even nice ones, aren't equipped to take things rationally. Ralphie was simply hoping that a good grade on his Red Ryder gun essay might do the trick in warming his mom to the idea of it in time for Christmas. In scene after scene, this film makes entertaining work out of showing us just how badly Ralphie wants that Red Ryder BB gun, and perhaps reminds us of more than a few times when our whimsical childhood wishes were not granted. A functional childhood must consist of intense expectations bumping headfirst against regular responses of no from the adults in the world. While Ralphie's ask wasn't terribly unreasonable, his holiday letdown, viewed through the eyes of a child, feels like a Shakespearean tragedy. We can all relate to the intensity of emotion at this age, so in this way too, we're all a bit like Ralphie, or were anyway. Childhood is marked by the frustration of recognizing that the things you want to do or have must yield to the reality that you are not yet responsible enough to handle them or to get them yourself, and that you'll simply have to wait for the day when you don't have to rely on the benevolence of the adults in your life. This is the built-in necessary motivation for children to slowly grow up to become responsible adults themselves. From experience, I can tell you that it is a beautiful thing to behold. Ultimately, Ralphie's rage does Farkus a favor. In a better world, conflicts are resolved amicably. But in the world we live in, some people just need their ass kicked. If this fact offends you or your sensibilities, you might consider how the relatively peaceful life you're enjoying is secured in the first place. In 2022's A Christmas Story Christmas, the less magical but enjoyable and kind-spirited sequel to this story, a grown-up Scut Farkus, now a police officer in the old neighborhood, tells Ralphie how that fight from so many years ago made him a better person.
We both know when we were kids, I was kind of a nightmare. But that day you handed my ass to me, I mean, that got me thinking. You know, and I put all that garbage behind me. And look at me now. I'm one of the good guys. So I guess what I'm saying is, I owe you, Parker.
This was a smart follow-up for the filmmakers to include and ties these two movies together nicely. And I love that they did it because this is how life works for us in so many different ways. Our trials, travails, and fumblings into each other serve their purpose of mutual downstream growth. Here are two characters who, in a small but important way, inadvertently help each other by following the trajectory of their life or character arcs. It's as if life itself intervenes on our behalf, regardless of whether or not we want it to.
Hey. Merry Christmas, Ralph.
Merry Christmas, Scott.
One more thing worth noticing and appreciating, and it's kind of a big deal, is how Ralphie's mom covers for him after the fight, keeping him out of trouble with his father, from whom we're not sure how he might have reacted otherwise.
So what else happened today?
Ralphie had a fight. You know how boys are. I see that the Bears are playing Green Bay on Sunday.
Oh, yeah. I slowly began to realize I was not about to be destroyed.
And there's a nice little directorial touch when Melinda Dillon, as Ralphie's mom, quickly taps Ralphie's arm after she somehow manages to dismissively tell his father about the fight. It's a quick little signal to Ralphie that he can relax after her diplomatic offhand account that minimized the event as a nothing burger, aided, of course, by distracting chats, a newspaper, and hot dinner. This is a nice little window into good parenting without turning the Parkers into laissez-faire parents. Because earlier we saw Ralphie get disciplined bitterly just for the comparatively minor idea of the offense of him using a swear word. Which leads us to this question. Feel free to comment if you have your own idea. Why does Ralphie's mom let him off the hook? I've wondered over the years why Ralphie's mom decides not to punish him at all. Do you think this is because she feels bad for Ralphie, or because she is quietly proud of the fact that he stood up for himself? I have my thoughts, but it might be colored by my own personal experience. Many years ago, my studious older brother came home from high school with a detention slip. Bad, erratic behavior was absolutely unheard of from my straight-laced, well-behaved sibling. So I was more than a bit curious about what he could have possibly gotten into at school. I asked him to tell me, and he soberly confirmed what I gleaned from seeing the detention slip itself. Basically, my brother was in gym class for a floor hockey unit. The kids were seated in rows with hockey sticks already in hand, and were getting a quick instructional lecture from the PE teacher on the rules. During the instruction, my brother kept getting hit in the back intentionally by the male student sitting behind him, who was getting his kicks by giving ceaseless jabs despite being asked by my brother to knock it off. At some point, my mild-mannered brother, like Ralphie, had had his fill, turned around and swung his stick into the other kid's face. Beyond my surprise at my brother's reaction was a feeling of pride for him, and that his detention was nothing more than a meaningless piece of paper, because something more important than the school's need to enforce docility among its students, particularly male students, something far more important actually happened. A little bully got told no in the only way he could understand. Because bullies tend to lack empathy, the only way they learn is for someone else to inflict an experience on them, similar to what they routinely inflict on others, since they lack the will or imagination necessary to consider other people's right to be left alone. This is the purpose of forceful responses and why they are sometimes necessary, particularly among otherwise passive people. We all have a little red guy downstairs that is just waiting for a reason to get to work, once it's called by the heart to do so. We can help others keep their dog on their chain by acting right ourselves. It shouldn't be that hard. But life on Earth is like a classroom shared between preschoolers and PhD candidates. Sometimes you're left no good choice but to correct wrong behavior directly. And despite protestations among the affluent, protected classes of people who can hire others to enforce order with force on their behalf, we have a duty to correct the transgressive behavior of bullies when mild alternative strategies fail. And it's why we feel a sense of shame when we fail to do so. No one has to talk us into feeling guilty when we fail to stand up for ourselves or for others. That shame was factory installed by whatever force created us.
Those men who bled the ground red at Falkirk, they fought for William Wallace, and he fights for something that I've never had. And I took it from him when I betrayed him, and I saw it in his face on the battlefield, and it's tearing me apart.
Seeing courage in action is like witnessing the fulfillment of a promise that there's a final mechanism within us that will, at some point and in a properly effective manner, emerge to resist and overcome evil. When we see it in others, we're inclined to see it in ourselves.
But men don't follow titles, they follow courage. Now, our people know you. Noble and common, they respect you. And if you would just lead them to freedom, they'd follow you. And so would I.
And maybe that's the purpose of the obstacles we face in our lives, be they schoolyard bullies or government tyrants. Thank the benevolent creator of your choice for the rage of Ralphie and for the mechanism of courage inside you. May you be up to the moments and challenges of your life, big or small, because when they come calling, and they will, you'll need all the courage you can take. If you've made it this far, whoever you may be, even if you disagree, I'm so thankful for your time and attention. Thanks for listening.